And just a sidelight on that, in this week's Catholic Standard, there's a reference to a recent conference at Trinity, and one of the speakers there made a quotation that is often comes up in this discussion, that the best and the brightest left because of this thing. Well, the best and the brightest, I don't know whether they were or they weren't, but they left of their own volition, and they left because of what the choices that they were made. Within a year, half of them were gone, and if they are no longer priests, it's because of the actions that they engaged in, and not because of any actions that the church engaged in. And so I resent that they be made out to be victims. It's also an insult to the priests who acted at that time to make statements like that. But in any case, within a year, they're down to about half the number. And then by 1971, when the case is going through the Roman congregation, there are officially 19 involved in this canonical case. But even of the 19, it seems that they're probably down to really a dozen, because of the 19, a good number of them had already dropped out too. Some also had been married and had left the priesthood. So finally, when the decision was made in Rome, they vindicated the canonical hearing that Boyle had given these men. They restated the fact that Humanae Vitae is the authentic teaching of the Church. They restated that the bishop of the diocese is responsible for the preaching and the teaching and the advice that's been given in the confessionals, and the priests are obligated to follow his directives. And then they asked the priests involved to acknowledge these statements that they had made. What they did not ask for, and what Cardinal Boyle wanted, was a retraction of the statement they had made, that couples in good conscience could dissent from the teaching of the Church on artificial contraception. They were never required to retract that statement. And so this leaves us with the final question, and really the question that comes from the whole episode, is how far are the Church's pastors willing to go to uphold its authentic teaching? This was really the question of the Washington case. Cardinal Boyle interpreted Humanae Vitae as it is written, as the authentic teaching of the Church, which must be accepted and obeyed, not only by the clergy, but also all faithful Catholics. And from his perspective, by saying that I am a Catholic, I accept the teaching of the Catholic Church. And to set up this false dichotomy between the Church's teaching and my rights or my conscience is simply a distortion of what it means to be a Catholic, because a faithful Catholic recognizes that the Church's teaching is essential to the formation of one's conscience and could never be, the teaching of the Church could never be in violation of one's conscience by virtue of the fact that the Holy Spirit is guiding the Church in its teaching. And so when this issue was being argued about, and the men who dissented were not required to retract the statement they had made, the press accounts, if you want to look at that when it happened in spring 1971, the interpretation was, well, it's a compromise. And although Cardinal Boyle at the time put a very good face on it because he was loyal to the Church, he did not voice his displeasure in public. I know from speaking to those associated with him at the time that he was deeply disappointed. That when push came to shove, when he had stuck his neck out and taken a great deal of abuse for being faithful to the Church's teaching mission, when push came to shove, a decision was made to find a compromise that basically left him holding the bag. He had been faithful, and the people in Rome eventually decided that we want this thing settled. We're not asking for a retraction. We want this thing ended, and so the sooner we forget about it, the better. Now, the lesson, I suppose, in the long run, it is just repeated over and over in the last 25 years, again, is how far are we willing to go to uphold the authentic teaching of the Church? If we're not willing to go very far to uphold the teaching, then the teaching itself, in a sense, becomes worthless. And we have the situation we have today where large numbers of Catholics feel free to dissent with the Church's teaching on this issue without even a second thought about it. There are many other things that could be said about this, but I guess the tribute to Boyle is his loyalty to the Church. And that loyalty, in the end, even included taking the fall. because it's his reputation that suffered in this. And it's his reputation that has been made into kind of a caricature of someone who was a rigid and ignorant and incompetent type of person. And that's simply not the case. He took the document seriously, he did what he believed was his obligation as a bishop of the church, and he made the consequences. If more priests and bishops were willing to do that, then perhaps we would see a greater loyalty to the teachings of the church, not only on this issue,